back here with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. And today we're going to do a personal carry holster for a 38 special Derringer. So it's not going to take a lot of leather, but it's still going to be pretty in-depth as far as making a holster, no matter what the size. In my humble opinion, on all the holsters that I've made, I feel like the smaller they are, the harder they are. It just seems more difficult to make a smaller holster. So we're going to go ahead and do a We the People theme on this holster. And I've already laser engraved it on here. I've already cut out my leather. I'll show you how I did that, how I came up with that design. So come on in and let's get started. Alright, so as I said, I already laser engraved the We the People artwork on there with the flag. And we fold that over. You can see it's going to be right on the rounded part. I didn't want to get it down in here to where it gets into the stitching area, and I am going to wet form this, so I didn't want it down in this area where the trigger and everything is. So we went ahead, and what I did was I took a piece of poster board and I laid the Derringer down, and I kind of did a rough outline around it. Then I like to tip it up and keep that centered so I can find the exact center of my fold, or where my leather is going to fold over, like so. So then I'll mark it on the top and the bottom. I'll use a straight edge and kind of do a dashed line, and that gives me my fold line. Then I cut this side out, and I did add a strip here for a hold down strip, and you can see it better on the holster. Once that's all stitched up, then this is going to come across and snap, and that'll hold it. So instead of adding that later, I put it into the actual design of the holster, so it's one piece of leather, and that way I don't have any more hardware back here than I need. So once I have that, then what I do is I'll come back, and depending on the thickness of the gun, and this one's at its thickest point is 1 inch. So what I'll do is normally add half of whatever the thickest part of that is to the outside of my drawing. So sometimes, and I won't cut it until I test it, I won't get into my leather until I test it with my pattern, but once I've done that, then I'll come back and I may have to add some more to make sure that the thickness of the gun is allowed for when you come push it down and those two pieces meet and you put the stitching in. The last thing you want is for this to be too short, too small, and then there's no way to get that stitched because there's not enough leather there to stitch that. So that's how I make my patterns. Again, some are easier than others. I find that semi-autos are easier than revolvers. That's just probably a personal thing, but this is really neither. So it's just something totally different. So once I do that, I'll take my pattern, I'll draw it out on my leather, and then I'll cut my leather out, and that gives me the leather I need for my holster. Now again, I'll triple check it, make sure that I've got plenty to do my stitching on, and that my hold down strap's going to work. So that gives you an idea with the hold down strap where that "We the People" flag shows up. So now I'm to the stage where I can go ahead and I want to bevel this real quick, and I'll need to strop my beveling tool and find my jeweler's rouge here and put that on my piece of stropping leather, and that'll polish up my beveling tool. And you can see how shiny and polished that is. That should make it glide right through the edge of that leather, which it does. Makes it glide through there real nice, smooth around the corners. I did use a ballpoint pen to trace that out from my pattern, and that beveling tool will cut any of that ink that's left from that right off of that leather, so you don't have to worry about any of that showing up. And I did do the end of the strap here with a rounded punch. When I go around these inside corners, just want to go real slow. Don't push real hard so you don't mash any of the leather. Just like cutting, the inside corners are tougher to cut and bevel than the outside corners. Come around this side, and that's the front done. And you can tell when you have a good sharp polished beveling tool because you can do it in one piece. You don't have a bunch of pieces. So I'll flip it over. We'll do the other side. And the whole key to getting a good holster that fits well is that pattern. So, you know, poster board's cheap. I can get 2 of those for $1 at the dollar store. White poster board. So I don't feel bad if I have to mess around and make a couple of patterns till I get it right. But what that does is that keeps me from wasting any of my leather by having to cut it 2 or 3 times to get it exactly the way I want it. So I work on the poster board until I get it exactly the way I want it for my pattern. Then I'll come back. Once I'm real happy with that, I'll come back and do my leather. And it seems to work really well. I don't seem to waste any leather that way. And again, poster board's cheap. You know, how many of these small patterns can you get out of a 20 by 26 piece of poster board? A bunch. 50 cents for that great big piece. So this part is what I used my rounded punch for. So I am going to quickly take my sponge with some tap water, wring that out, and I'm just going to lightly encase that edge. This is just damp now. It's not wet, soaking wet. It's just damp. So I'll do that edge. Let that sit for just a second. Let that dry just a hair. Then what I'm going to do is use my burnishing tool. Let's get a nice slick edge on it. Notice how I try to hold that as straight as possible, so it's nice and steady. And again, burnishing is not so much how hard you push, but the actual friction. To get that shine and that hard edge. And then these inside corners, and once I get out here, I'll go back to my groove so I can get on the outside edge, and you can see how that's really starting to slick up and get rounded. Go around the outside corners, come around to another inside corner, and then go back to my grooved side. And if it acts like it's getting a little too dry, then go ahead and just moisten it back up a little bit. And it'll slicken right up. So that gives you a good idea. See that shiny, slicked edge there now. You really see it at that angle. There you go. So I got a nice smooth slicked edge. I'll set that aside, and what I'll do is I'll go ahead and get me a piece of scrap leather here. I can either use that or I can use my poly cutting board. I think I'll use it. Gives me a little bit tougher surface here. And what I need to do is I need to see where I need to put my stitching holes. So I'm going to go ahead, lay this in here, and get an idea where I need to put my stitching holes. And I'll go ahead and mark the beginning of where I want my stitching holes, and then I'll mark the end where I want to end my stitching holes. Then I can take my grooving tool and carefully take my time, because there's so many turns here. I want to keep those nice and even. I don't want it to get narrow and then from the edge and then wide again. So I'll keep turning that till I get to the end. Now I've got my groove for my stitching holes, and I've got a little bit sticking out here. All I have to do is take the tip of my knife and push down on that, and that'll clean that right up. So I'm ready to go ahead and do my stitching holes. I'm going to punch those in, and I'm going to use a 2-prong punch. I'm going to start here at the bottom, work my way around and up. The reason I'm using a 2-prong, there's not going to be that many holes, and I got a lot of curves. So when I get to that situation, I always use my 2-prong. It does take just a little bit longer, but I can get around these curves, these inside and outside corners, real nice and neat. And not worry about getting off my stitching line, my groove line. If I tried to use 3 or 4 prong punch, it's just going to be too tight, and then some of my holes are going to want to wander off of my groove line. This way, I'll show you in just a second, this way I can keep all of my holes in my stitching groove, and they're nice and neat, and they follow that contour perfectly. So what I'll do is I'll fold that over, make that match on the other side, like so, and then I'll take my single punch, stitching punch, and I'll put that in there all the way through both pieces, so that it's going to hold it as I come down here and start to punch through the other side. So that gives me a starting hole at the beginning up here that I punched all the way through, and then I did 3 holes down here. What that does is that allows me to know exactly where to start my grooving for my stitching. And then it allows me to follow that contour just like I did on the other side. And now I know where to stop at the bottom at my last hole. So now I can take my 2-prong punch again, start right down here where my holes came through, and work my way back up just like I did on the other side, following that groove. And then what makes you know that everything's going to match up when you do your stitching is when you come around that last corner, and you come to that last hole, it's going to meet up in that first hole that you went all the way through. So there's what that side looks like. There's that side, and there's the first side. So now those holes are going to match up when I go to stitch those, and that's going to make this match up perfect. So the next thing I need to do is go ahead and normally I'll do my dyeing at this point before I stitch, and I don't know. I think I'm going to try something different that I've never done before. I think I'm going to try to leave the inside natural color and only dye the outside. So let's try this. Let's see how this works. I think I want to try to do the front in a lighter color. So let's look at a tan. I've got tan and I've got saddle tan. Let's do saddle tan. And I'll grab a container that I use for dyeing, little plastic throwaway containers. And normally I would use a wool dauber, but since I'm going to try to keep the backside natural color and only do the outside in the saddle tan, I think I'm going to use a microfiber cloth. Never done that before either, so this is something new, totally new. Trying to just dye one side, and instead of using a wool dauber, I'll use this microfiber cloth. Shake this up a little bit. Put some in the container. I always like to wipe this off real good before I get started. And put it away. And let's go ahead and just wrap that around my finger, and let's put a little bit on there. And I think the key would be, that's what I'm trying to go in a circular motion, which I've never done before either, but is not to get too much on there at one time. It'll be hard to go in a circular motion on that strap part. And it's just going to darken that "We the People" area where that was laser engraved. So it will dye that area too, so it'll just darken that up. I'm trying to get it in the grooves where I did my grooving for my stitching. So it's almost like staining wood, except I'm doing it with dyeing leather. I've stained wood this way many times, but never dyed leather like this. So let's wait a few seconds here and let's see what this looks like. Might be able to take the clean part of a microfiber and let's kind of lightly buff that. I'm not pushing hard at all. I'm just taking any excess off of there. You can see it didn't even come off on my cloth. And it looks like it did a great job. I didn't get any on the backside, which I wanted to keep natural. And you can see all it did was darken up the We the People flag. So let's take a look and see how that might look. We stitch that, leave that inside natural colored. I think it's going to look sharp. Now, here's the next thing I want to try to do that I've never done successfully, but I'm going to try it this time. Let me get rid of this saddle tan dye. I'm going to use the same container and I'm going to grab some black. This is Fibings black, the other one was some Fibings saddle tan. And I'm going to put just a little bit of this black in with whatever's left of that saddle tan in that dish. Now I'm going to do the same thing. Put that around my finger like so, and I'm just barely gonna touch it to that black. I don't have hardly anything on there at all. And I'm gonna see if I can control that black on that edge. Remember, that edge is rounded now, and I don't want I'd rather it be heavily on the back side than the front side. And I know I'm out of camera. Sorry. I get engrossed in what I'm doing sometimes, don't pay attention. So what I'm doing is I'm putting black dye right on that edge, and I don't have very much on there on my cloth. And again, I'd much rather have it come over on the back side than on the front side. And that's what makes it a little tough with that being rounded. And also the inside corners Have to be very, very careful. You don't want it, the thing is, you don't want it to bleed into your saddle tan. So I'm taking it very, very slow, starting on the back side and rotating it as I move my cloth. That way I know I'm not going to get too much on the front. And I wish I'd pay attention and stay in the camera here, stay in the shot. And when I'm putting that on this microfiber cloth, I'm putting very, very little on there. Very little. I can always go back and get more if I need to. And depending on how far you want that to come over is how far you're going to rotate that as you move that rag back and forth. It seems to be working fairly well. Again, I just want that edge black. I don't want it to bleed into my saddle tan side. So I'm really going to take my time. And here's where it could get kind of crazy, is on this inside corner like that. You'd have to be very, very careful. You definitely don't want that to slip off of there while you're pressing on that cloth. And you're always tempted to go on this side, the finished side. Don't do that. Stay on this back side. Even if it takes longer to get around one of these corners, stay on that back side. Do not break that temptation to come over on this side and hit it, because that's when it's going to cause you some problems. You're going to get too much on that side, that finished side, and then you're going to ruin it. Again, if you take your time and you're rotating that as you're putting that on, and you start on the back edge like so, and just keep going back and forth and rotate that around toward the front edge, then you know when you see all that natural color disappear, stop. You've went far enough. Don't keep going. As soon as you see that natural color disappear and turn black, you stop. So you start on the back side, keep going back and forth, rotating that toward the front. When you see that disappear, stop. You've got enough on there. If you keep going, that's when it's going to bleed real bad into your front. So I'm all the way around to the other side now, and it's like anything else, the more you do it, the more relaxed you'll get with it. And what helps it is that we did that burnishing, and got that slick. If that was real rough, that would make it a lot more difficult to get this black on that edge without ruining it. And here's one where I just have to be patient until I see that natural color disappear, and then stop. So I've got one little small end to do here. One more inside corner to do, and they are the toughest. And then come around to where I began on that first outside corner. So there's what I ended up with. You can see I've got a nice black edge. Didn't get in to bleeding into my saddle tan color. So I'll let that dry, and then I'll be ready to do my stitching. I'll go ahead and stitch this, let it dry, stitch it off camera. If you want to see some stitching videos, there's plenty of them. You can go back and take a look at some of mine, or look at some other stitching videos. But I am going to hand saddle stitch this. It won't take very long because there's not very many stitches. But I'll hand saddle stitch this. I think I'm going to stitch it with black to go along with my black edge. And once I get that stitched up, I'll be back. Alright, so I've got this stitched. I decided to use black stitching to go with the edge. I also decided to go ahead and dye the inside black, and I should have done that or made that decision before I stitched it, but I didn't. I didn't make that decision until after I got it stitched. So I'm going to try and do that without making any mess or mistakes. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Cut my threads off. It's on the inside of my seam. I'll move in slowly with my lighter. Burn that. Flatten that out. Flatten that knot out. You can't even tell it's there. So what I'm going to do is grab another container, and again, these, I know I just threw one away, but these containers are so cheap. You get like a dozen of them or 10 of them for $1.25 at the dollar store. Put some black dye in that container. And since I already did the edge, I'm not real concerned about getting any black dye on my saddle tan. And I'm not going to use a wool dauber. I'm going to use one of these foam tipped Q-tips or swabs. I guess Q-tip is a brand name, but I can dip that in my dye like so. And very carefully, again, I'm not soaking it because I don't want that to run anywhere. And I'm very carefully dyeing that natural side. or the inside. And I think the longer I looked at it as I stitched it, the better I thought it was going to look if I finished the inside black instead of leaving it natural. And I'll show it to you here in just a second. I think it's going to look a lot better black than natural. And I definitely don't want to get any of that on the saddle tan, so I got to be real careful how I'm doing that. And I may have to take, we'll look and see, I may have to take a small artist brush to get down in that crevice where that's stitched together. Again, this would have been so much easier if I'd have done this before I stitched it, but again, I didn't make that decision until I was about halfway done stitching this, and it hit me as I was stitching it. I'm like, man, it would have looked so much better. I thought I wanted to leave it natural, but I was like, it looks so much better if I would have done it in black. And I think it was because of the black stitching. So again, I don't want to get this thing soaking wet to where it drips, because that's when you get into problems. You drip on your other color, you drip on your dyeing board here, and then next thing you know, you're rolling your saddle tan color in that dye that you dripped, and that's just not any good. It's not going to work. So I'll spin that around. I'm going to have to grab, those things are so cheap, you get a ton of them for $1.25. I also get those at the Dollar Tree. It looks like I'm going to have to put a little more dye in there, and I want to be very careful not to spill any of it. Definitely keep it away from my holster. And I will keep this hand super clean. That's why you don't see me touching any of the dye or anything with my left hand. I'm only holding that holster with that left hand, touching all my dye swabs and everything with my right hand. You could do just the opposite if you needed to. And I'm just taking my time, making sure that I'm getting the whole inside of that dyed. And again, it would have been so much easier if I'd have done it first, but I didn't. So I want to take, I've got as much of that I can do with a cotton swab, or that foam swab. So I'm going to take a brush here. This is a fine camel hair brush. and you'll notice it's a 1/4 inch brush, but I'm going to use the edge of it using the same hand, so I'm not touching it with the hand I've been messing with the dye on. And I'm going to squeeze that open a little bit, just get a little bit of dye on there. Enough to get that seam. I'll lay it down, turn it around, a little bit of dye, and you can see, I don't know if you can see that or not, inside there's a little bit of natural color of that leather, and I've got one little tiny spot left, and I don't want to screw it up. I got it. So there it is now, with the black stitching, the black edging, and now the inside's black. And it looks so much better, in my opinion, with the outside in that saddle tan, and then We the People and the flag in that darker brown. So I am going to throw this stuff away real quick. And there's the holster. I'll have to let this dry. In fact, I'll let it dry overnight. Then on the next video, I'll take this holster, finish it with the hardware, and then I'll wet form it. So that'll be the next video next week. So make sure you come back and check it out. And we'll finish this up with that Derringer. Alright, and one thing that I didn't mention was that this is just going to be a pocket holster. So I'll put the Derringer in here, and I can keep that snapped, and that keeps that from moving around in my pocket or being dangerous. Keeps a hammer from ever coming back. And I just slide this whole thing in my pocket. It's really small. I don't know if I can get back far enough, but it would slide in your pocket very easily. So it's just a little pocket holster. Doesn't have anything, no belt loop or anything to slide it on a belt. I guess you could add that if you wanted to at some point, or a clip. A clip would be easy to add. But for right now, I'm just making this a pocket holster just to make it safe to carry that instead of just sliding that down in my pocket. So I appreciate you coming along. I appreciate you watching. If you haven't, please hit that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. And as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.